Learn all about living in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, from Ben Pitre in this video interview with Expats in Mexico. Why did you choose San Miguel de Allende as a place to live in Mexico?
Well, I grew up in the Gulf Coast, so I feel like my hot account is overdrawn now for some decades. And I'm very, very fair. And so I am just not a beach person. As it is here, I have to wear a hat all the time. And I just was more interested really in the social life here and the general milieu of the kinds of people who came here, either seasonally or to live.
What did you think the first time that you saw San Miguel?
Well, I thought it was beautiful, and it also reminded me a great deal of the French Quarter in New Orleans.
What were you doing when you first got there?
I studied Spanish for months and months, not very successfully. Then I met somebody who had been renovating houses for clients. And I thought, well, I'll have him renovate a house for me as a spec house. And so I did a number of those over time. When I first came here in 2002, there was still one ruin left behind the parochia. There had been, many in the 60s and 70s, but there was still one left. And in fact, while I was here that first time, work started on it to rehab it. And so there were a lot of opportunities, and I bought them and turned them into really colonial houses. When you come here, if you see the area between Insurgentes and Calzada de la Luz, that was a field with 10 houses in it 40 years ago. And now you would think it's part of the historic core of San Miguel because everybody built houses in the same colonial style.
So you were rehabbing houses in the city center?
Was, yes.
And how much were those houses selling for back then?
The first one I bought was $105,000, I think. And it was a very small house, and the guy I was working with was absolutely brilliant because when I complained about how low the ceilings were, he excavated the floor, which I think I could have sat there for a year or two and not come up with as an idea.
How big were those houses in terms of square footage?
That house was about 1,200 square feet.
And what would it sell for today?
Oh, that's a good question. It actually just sold not so long ago, and I don't know what it sold for, but I would think pretty solidly in the twos, maybe even the high twos.
So you can still buy in downtown around the parochia, by the way, is the iconic church in the center of the city, right?
Yes, exactly. And when I came here, the relationship of expats, Mexicans, and tourists was very different. And so,
how different?
Well, there were far fewer expats living here. There were far fewer tourists, and there were almost no Mexican tourists. So people would come for a couple of weeks, or they would come for the winter, or they would come for the summer. And so a lot of the people that I knew when I first came here have passed on in one way or the other, and their homes are now restaurants and food courts and hotels. So the sort of next ring, the slightly outlying areas are really where a lot of the focus is for people who come to live here now, because the center can often be, especially now that we have Mexicans who come for long weekends, those long weekends can be really congested. So going out a little farther, which would be like a 10 to 20 minute walk from the parochia, is really more like the San Miguel when I came here. I mean, there are bakeries and stores and restaurants and things, and the people you see on the street are likely to be your neighbors, not so likely to be renters or hotel people, as in the center.
What kind of housing is available to expats in that area that you just spoke of?
Well, basically the same thing. I mean, either there are some greenfield sites, and people have built. Expats tend to prefer overwhelmingly the colonial look, which I think is very unfortunate because, from the point of view of architecture, this is one of the most exciting countries in the world. And all too often, the expats arrive here wanting pseudo-colonial or something that fits in that. But most of the houses generally follow a traditional Mexican colonial place. But when you are out there, you are out of the historic district. So if you want to have a very modern house built, you surely can.
And how much would it cost to buy a typical, let's say, maybe 1,800 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath or 3-bath home?
In these walking neighborhoods that I'm describing, you're probably talking somewhere between the high ones to the mid to high twos, depending on the level of finishing and so forth. Yeah, so that would be about right.
But for 1,800 square feet for, say, $200,000 is pretty reasonable for people coming from major urban centers in the U.S. and Canada.
Well, yes, I mean, it's quite, if you come from California or New York, it's really quite stunning because you sell your 1-bedroom apartment for $1.5 million and then suddenly places. And then the country is, yet another step down in terms of pricing. So many people come here not wanting to drive. I remember when I came here, I had a car, but I would often not drive for 4 or 5 days, and I would send emails telling my friends in Houston and Los Angeles that, well, I haven't driven since Monday. But as the center has become more congested and the traditional festivals that we've had have really amped up because the number of people who attend has doubled and tripled and quadrupled, more and more people have sought country life. It's a lot quieter, and you do get a lot more house for your money.
Is public transportation readily accessible and inexpensive?
Public transit within the city is great. It's anywhere from 7 to 11 pesos, so that's 30 cents to 50 to 60 cents. And the service out into the country is in some places very good. But like for me, I have something like a 6 or 8 o'clock in the morning. Then I have an 11:15, and then I have a 4 something, a 6, and that's it.
How far from the city center do you live?
I am less than 8 miles.
Oh, that's reasonable when you think about urban areas.
Well, yeah, it's really stunning. I mean, if you come here, and I hope you will, I mean, you'll experience it as very tranquil, and we have rabbits and roadrunners and all of that sort of stuff. And then we are just so close to town. I mean, in Houston, you would drive an hour and a half to have what I have, from the center. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's become more and more popular. And then also, I'm on the highway between San Miguel and Dolores Hidalgo. And we now have a number of really terrific restaurants. When I bought here, if you wanted to have lunch on Saturday, you had to drive into town and park. But now we have a number of choices out here. We also have 2 or 3 vineyards out here, including one called Tierra del Cuna, which has won the most prizes all over the world of Mexican vineyards.
Well, your house looks beautiful, Ben. How large is it? And maybe you can talk a little bit about it.
Well, it's a little over 7,000 square feet. I have 7 bedrooms, but I'm getting ready to combine 2 of them. So I have 6 bedrooms and 5 baths, though I'm thinking about turning one of the baths into 2. And it's very much in a hacienda kind of style. If it's not unusual for people to walk in here and say, how old is this house? And the answer is, 9 years or whatever it is. And we've used a lot of old parts, old doors and things. And we also have suppliers in Dolores Hidalgo who can replicate an old door in a way that you would never guess it was brand new.
And how much did you pay for it then?
Well, I acquired it in a sort of multiple business transaction that involved another house and some other things. But I acquired two houses and more than 3 hectares for about $450,000.
Oh, that's incredible. What would you estimate your house would sell for today?
Well, when I complete the work I have in mind, I think it'll be pretty solidly in the sixes.
$600,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're talking about a very, very large 7,000 square foot home.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of ridiculously big, and I'm in the process of selling the smaller one, which is really wonderful and has more than 300-year-old beams, 300-year-old trees that are being the beams of the house and are just amazing.
Sounds marvelous. Um, you're still working, right?
I am, yes. I still,
Where do you work?
I sell real estate and I work for this wonderful company called Realty San Miguel.
How well do you speak Spanish now? You said that you took a few months of Spanish when you first arrived. Have you achieved some degree of fluency?
Well, no, I have a really good vocabulary. I'm terribly bad at verbs. And I've learned that I know enough to cause trouble. So if somebody says mother, son, barn, horse, shot, I have no idea whether the mother shot the horse or the son shot the barn. It's really a problem, and it's caused some real trouble. So I try to blank out. If I hear gasoline, then I'm present, but I don't. I try to avoid anything that involves action.
But in San Miguel, you get along fine with what we like to refer to as restaurant Spanish, or at least
Exactly.
capability Spanish, right?
Exactly. The pleasantries when you're introduced and questions, but we have a very high English speaking service population. So if you walk into a restaurant or a hardware store or something, you're very likely to get some degree of Spanish, or they'll call somebody over, some degree of English, or they'll call somebody over who speaks English.
What is your cost of living like? Like your electricity bill and your gas bill? I would assume that it gets a little chilly during the winter, so you might have to have some gas, and a little warm during the summer when you have to have electricity.
Yes, well, our gas is propane, which is delivered by a truck. And I'm not exactly sure. We have several tanks, and I know one of them we filled up over a year ago, and it's still not empty. So my numbers are not the best, but I would say that we probably don't spend $100 a month, even in the winter,
For utilities.
for gas.
Uh-huh.
And then our utilities are very low. They're probably on the order of $15 or $20 a month.
Oh, that's great. Unlike a lot of the coastal cities where you have to run the air conditioning a lot, and electricity is fairly expensive in Mexico.
Well, yes, and as I've said to people, you really gain several $100,000 in your net worth when you come here, because virtually no one has air conditioning, almost no one has forced heating, and so your bills for these things are really shocking in comparison to spending the summer in Puerto Vallarta or something like that.
What do you pay for your cell phone, your monthly fee for cell phone?
I believe that it is around $20, and it is unlimited calling to the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And I do have a restriction on the amount of information I can send over it, but that doesn't really affect me, because since I'm only 8 miles from my office, I'm
Sure.
there within minutes almost all the time.
You mentioned these wonderful restaurants that have popped up around where you live. Are they that expensive, or?
No, we're very fond of going to this French restaurant where they have croque madames and croque monsieurs, and those are around $6. So we can go there on a Friday afternoon, have two of them, have a glass of wine, and tip, and we're out of there for under $20.
Well, for two people.
for two people. And we have a wonderful restaurant called El Vergel, which is a branch of one that is in town. And for two of us, for a wonderful Friday afternoon lunch with appetizers and main course and a bottle of champagne and a tip, which may have been increased by the bottle of champagne, it was about $80, $85 for the two of us.
For two people. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're in love with San Miguel.
I am. It's great, and it's in so many ways. It's a small town. It's wonderful to go and run an errand and run into someone like you were on a college campus or something. And it's just become very interesting. I mean, we support a really interesting live music scene, and you can actually go in somewhere and sit down and for less than $10, have a drink, less than $5 sometimes, and hear great live music without three other people sticking their elbows in your face or your body because you're so packed in there. So that has been wonderful. We have an improv group. We have a comedy club, open mic night. I've been threatening to do that for a few months. And then there are just so many. I mean, part of the thing here is really the people. I mean, I think San Miguel is really beautiful and it's wonderful and the weather's really great and all that is so nice. But there are many places like that in Mexico. But what is so magic about here is like if you're a quilter, you can actually find 6 or 8 people who quilt and you can go over to their house and make a quilt. You know, there's just everybody, virtually every interest is represented by enough people to have that, you know, working number to get together or go to dinner or do whatever.
If you're going to tell someone that single thing, that most important thing about living in San Miguel, the thing you love the most, what would it be?
Well, I would probably say the sense of community. Because in so many ways, Mexico is interesting to me because it seems like life is going on in 3 centuries at one time. My friends in Mexico City are as fashion forward as anybody in Milan and Paris, and they're living this really grand life. Most of San Miguel and most of the people that I know in San Miguel really remind me of growing up in Louisiana in the 50s and 60s. People have time for everybody. They walk their kids to school. There's just this wonderful community. And then there are, not so much in our area, but there are these indigenous people who are really living very much like their ancestors were 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And it's all going on at one time. So there's somebody driving by in a brand new BMW, and there's a guy in a horse carrying a bouquet to his girlfriend, and it's all happening at once. And I know a couple. He is French and was a French teacher in Florida. And he inherited a wonderful home in the south of France and sold it so that they could come and live here. And I said, well, Mike, I'm so surprised. I mean, you're French and everybody in the world seems to want to be in the south of France. And he said, well, you know, I feel like if we had gone to live in the south of France, that it could have taken years before we had ever known our neighbors or years before they had ever invited us for a drink. But because the expat community is aware that it is in another country, and sometimes strange things happen that we have to respond to, I mean, we're really far more caretaking of each other than the very same people are in Houston or Chicago.
Sounds like a great place to live, Ben. Listen, thank you so much for your time this morning.